I had been driving the same route for years, hauling goods from the bustling port of Los Angeles to the quieter, sprawling cities of the Midwest. My rig, an old but reliable Kenworth, was my home away from home, its cab cluttered with coffee cups, maps, and a collection of good luck charms from truck stops across the country. It was a clear night, and I was making my way through the Mojave Desert. The air was cool, a welcome relief after the sweltering day. The highway was a ribbon of asphalt stretching infinitely under a canopy of stars with no sign of civilization in sight. The hum of the engine was comforting, a constant companion on these lonely stretches of road. As I approached a curve near the midpoint of my journey, my headlights caught the glint of something reflective on the road. I slowed down, peering through the windshield, and saw an overturned car resting awkwardly on its side. Glass littered the highway, shimmering like tiny diamonds under the moonlight. I pulled over to the shoulder, cutting the engine and grabbing my flashlight. As I approached the vehicle, a chill crept up my spine. The driver's side door was open, swinging slightly in the desert breeze. There was no one inside, but something felt off. I shone the flashlight inside and saw a purse, a cell phone, and a child's teddy bear scattered across the back seat. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe the driver had gone to get help? But we were miles from the nearest town, and there hadn't been another car on the road for at least an hour. I considered calling the highway patrol, but my cell phone had no signal out here. As I turned back towards my truck, the beam of my flashlight caught something peculiar, a set of fresh footprints leading away from the car into the desert. Curiosity got the better of me, and I followed them a few steps before stopping. The desert was vast and unforgiving, and without a clear idea of where they led, I decided it was best not to venture too far. Returning to my truck, I felt uneasy. My instincts told me something wasn't right, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. I was about to start the engine when a movement in my side mirror caught my eye. There, silhouetted against the moonlight, were two figures emerging from the shadows, moving quickly toward me. Adrenaline surged through my veins. I scrambled to lock the doors and started the engine. The figures reached the rear of my trailer, and in the mirror, I saw them trying to open the latch. They were after my cargo. I threw the truck into gear and hit the gas, the engine roaring to life. The sudden movement knocked one of them to the ground. I glanced in the mirror and saw the other figure helping their partner to their feet. They were yelling something I couldn't hear over the sound of the engine and the pounding of my heart. I sped down the highway, eyes darting between the road and the mirrors, watching for any sign of pursuit. As I drove, I reached for the CB radio and called for help, hoping someone out there would pick up. A fellow trucker responded, and I quickly relayed my situation, my voice steadying with the knowledge that help was on the way. After what felt like an eternity, I saw the flashing lights of a highway patrol car approaching from the opposite direction. I slowed down and pulled over, relieved to see the officers stepping out, ready to assist. The officers took my statement and promised to investigate the overturned car and the figures I had encountered. I learned later that the car had been reported stolen, and the footprints in the desert led to a makeshift campsite where stolen goods were being collected. As I resumed my journey, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to being a victim myself. The night had closed in around me, but the headlights of my truck cut through the darkness, guiding me safely onward. I kept my eyes on the road, more vigilant than ever, knowing that in the vastness of the desert, danger could lurk in the most unexpected places. I was cruising along a desolate stretch of highway, the kind where the road seems to stretch on forever, and the only sound is the hum of my truck engine. It was one of those nights where everything feels both familiar and oddly isolating. After several hours of driving, I decided to stop at a small gas station that appeared out of nowhere like a beacon in the dark. The place had an old-fashioned charm, or maybe just a sense of decay, with its flickering neon sign and a convenience store that looked like it hadn't had a customer in years. The lone attendant, a grizzled guy with a face like worn leather, barely looked up from his magazine as I walked in. I noticed a man in a shabby jacket hanging around near the counter, glancing nervously at the gas pumps. I grabbed some coffee and snacks and was heading back to my truck when the man approached me. He offered me a cheap-looking wristwatch, claiming it was a great deal and asking if I was interested. His pitch seemed oddly pushy, and I declined, sensing something was off. The man's demeanor changed abruptly, and he seemed displeased, but didn't press the issue further. Back in my truck, I tried to ignore the strange encounter, but as I pulled out of the station, I noticed that same old sedan from earlier was now tailing me. At first, I figured it was just a coincidence, but then the sedan's headlights started flashing on and off, and it kept a steady distance behind me. Things took a turn for the worse when the sedan's driver began aggressively flashing their high beams and honking the horn. It was clear they were trying to get my attention, and the growing realization that I was being followed made my stomach drop. I decided to take a sudden turn into the nearest town, hoping to lose the sedan and find a safer place. I parked in a brightly lit lot and kept a close eye on the sedan, which followed me but eventually stopped at a distance, still with its engine running. I quickly dialed the local police, giving them a rundown of the situation, including the sedan, the man's odd offer, and the unsettling behavior. The dispatcher assured me they'd send a patrol car right away. While I waited, the sedan eventually turned and drove off. The police arrived soon after, took my statement, and checked the gas station's security footage. They confirmed that the man who'd approached me was indeed the driver of the sedan. Though the police promised to investigate further, the whole experience left me on edge. It was a stark reminder of how quickly a routine stop can turn into a nerve-wracking ordeal. And it reinforced the importance of staying alert and trusting your instincts, even during the most ordinary moments on the road. I was hauling a load of lumber from Portland to a construction site in Idaho, taking one of the lesser-known routes through the Cascade Mountains. The scenery was breathtaking, with towering evergreens and deep valleys, but the roads were narrow and winding, demanding full attention. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the road, and I enjoyed the quiet solitude that came with driving through such remote areas. As evening approached, the sky turned a dusky purple, and fog began to roll in, obscuring the road ahead. I switched on my fog lights, but the mist was thick, swirling around the truck like a living entity. I knew there was an old, rickety bridge up ahead, one I'd crossed before without issue. It was known as Fisherman's Bridge, a single-lane structure notorious among truckers for its precarious state. Something about the fog and the growing darkness made the prospect of crossing it unsettling. When I reached the bridge, it loomed out of the fog like an apparition. Its metal beams were rusted, and its wooden planks creaked ominously under the weight of my truck. I slowed down, my headlights barely piercing the thick mist, and cautiously started across. The river below roared with the rush of snowmelt, its waters turbulent and unwelcoming. Halfway over, the truck jolted violently, making my heart skip a beat. I stopped, gripping the wheel tightly, and listened. The creaking of the planks beneath me was louder than I remembered. Then I heard it. A faint cry for help, echoing through the fog. It was a haunting sound that cut through the ambient noise of the night. I peered into the dense mist, trying to locate the source of the sound. The cries grew louder, more desperate, and I realized they were coming from below the bridge. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the cab, leaving the engine running. My boots thudded on the wooden planks as I moved toward the edge, heart racing. The fog swirled around me as I made my way to the side of the bridge, the flashlight beam cutting through the murk. Leaning over the side, I scanned the area below. To my shock, I saw a car partially submerged in the river, its headlights flickering dimly. Someone was trapped inside, pounding on the window with their fists. Adrenaline surged through me. I climbed down the embankment, slipping on the wet rocks, and reached the vehicle. It was precariously balanced on its side, the rushing water threatening to drag it downstream. The roar of the river was deafening, and the cold spray from the water added to the urgency of the situation. Inside, a young woman was frantically trying to break the window. Her eyes met mine, filled with fear and desperation. I shouted to her, gesturing for her to cover her face, and used a rock to shatter the glass. I reached in, unbuckled her seatbelt, and helped her climb out. She was soaked and shivering, but otherwise unharmed. Together, we scrambled back up the embankment to the safety of the bridge. I wrapped her in a blanket from my truck and called for emergency services on the CB radio, praying someone would pick up despite the poor signal in the mountains. The minutes dragged on, the silence filled only with the distant rumble of the river and her shaky breaths. As we waited for help to arrive, she told me her story. She had been driving home after visiting friends when the fog descended, obscuring her view of the road. Losing control, she had skidded off the road and over the edge, the car landing precariously in the river. She had been trapped for hours, her cries for help swallowed by the mountains and fog. She had all but given up hope when she saw my truck approaching. Eventually, the flashing lights of emergency vehicles cut through the darkness and rescue crews arrived to take over. They helped her into an ambulance, checking for any injuries. As I watched them work, I couldn't shake the feeling of how close I'd come to not stopping, to driving on without knowing someone's life was hanging in the balance. I continued my journey that night, the fog lifting as I descended the mountain. The bridge, the cries, and the rescue replayed in my mind, a reminder of how unpredictable the road could be. I knew I'd never forget the haunting encounter on that foggy mountain bridge and how a simple decision to listen had made all the difference.